Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software engineer by developing yourself, your skills, your network, your habits, and more. I'm one of your co-hosts, Peter Elbaum, and today I speak with Maria Lamardo, who is Senior Manager of Accessibility Engineering at CVS Health. And we get into Maria's journey as a software engineer, how she came to find her focus in accessibility engineering, some low-hanging fruit that any engineering team can implement in order to improve accessibility, how to get into public speaking, and lots of other great wisdom tidbits that Maria has. I know you'll love this episode, so without further ado, here is my conversation with Maria Lamardo. Maria, welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast.
Hey, Peter, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. It's been a while. We met a few years ago, back when Aaron and I were running local meetups, back when people did things in person. Now we just have a podcast. But it's really good to see you again. I know you've been up to some really interesting stuff, so I'm really looking forward to getting into that. I'm curious, just from the beginning, for people who might not be familiar with you, if you could say a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Maria Lamardo. Right now, I am the head of accessibility training at CVS Health. I have been a JavaScript developer, really focused in Vue. I've gone through an interesting path getting into tech. I also don't come from a technical background. Kind of got into tech about 4 years ago. And of course, I met Peter through my community involvements, speaking at meetups and really developing my skills.
Yeah, that's great. And I think there's a lot there to get into, particularly your community involvement, I think has been really cool to witness. But just starting off, I'm curious if you might be willing to say a little bit about how you got into engineering in the first place.
Sure. So I actually have a background in applied behavior analysis. So I was a behavior analyst, and I was in that field for about 8 years. Roughly about 4 years ago, I had some health issues that kind of led me to leave that field behind. And I was bedridden for a while, and I was like, oh no, what do I do with my career? My husband, he was a back-end developer, and he's like, oh, you know what you could do from bed for the rest of your life? You could become a programmer. That's something you could do remotely forever. So I kind of started learning a little bit about front-end development. I started taking Codecademy courses, and then I enrolled in some Udacity nano degrees. And that's actually how I got involved in the community. In one of the nano degree programs that I got, it was like a scholarship base with Google. And the way that it worked is like they would admit like 15,000 students, and then they would grab the top 10% and move them into the nano degree. And the way that they would do that is really track not only your completion through the coursework, but track your involvement in the class forums and the Slack channels. And it got to be a lot for me. Like, it felt a lot like heavy social media. So I asked one of the instructors if I could instead do something locally, like in person, and have that count towards like my participation for the class. And they were like, we've never done that, but let's give it a try. And that's kind of where I started putting together a lot of study sessions for developers around the area. And then it kind of grew from there. I never really intended to get into the meetup space, but that's kind of where that led, just based on having a group of developers that were wanting to learn together, and then, opportunities kept presenting themselves to turn this into a meetup and do something more, formal with it.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. I think we met around that time. I think you were towards the beginning of your journey, but I never knew the connection between what you were studying and getting involved in local meetups. So that's cool. I've never heard of that being kind of a component of the course, but I think maybe it should be, because I think clearly it's done a lot of good things in your career. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. So you were studying, you got your first job at some point, and then kind of where did things go from there?
Yeah, so I remember, and I think this is great to hear for new developers, especially if you're kind of coming in from a bootcamp, path. I definitely, when I was kind of wrapping up, not even wrapping up, but in the middle of this program, really like learning about all things tech, right? I was pretty new to this. I started applying to absolutely every job that I saw that was like under 5 years of experience. Some of them were just absolutely out of my reach, but I just kept applying. I was really trying to understand what companies were asking for in interviews, to understand what I needed to study. So I'm not even kidding. I would go to like 8 interviews a week and failed absolutely all of them. Maybe I would get one really good one where I would take notes. Okay, what did I do right? Or where were all my gaps, honestly? But eventually I got an internship at Red Hat. Red Hat is a company here in Raleigh. They were amazing. I joined as a part of their marketing team, UX. It was like a UX designer slash developer role. It was a little bit of both. And it really exposed me to a lot of stuff, actually. And my first task as an intern was, hey, intern, can you please quickly test this site that's about to go live? Because, we just need someone to test it really quick. And it was like really quick changes that they made. It wasn't supposed to be, I wasn't supposed to be finding anything extraordinary. But here I am. I had just taken a little course on accessibility in Udacity. And the first thing I did was turn on my screen reader and tried to go through that site. And then here I come to them with like 20 issues that they weren't expecting. And they're like, we've never seen testing like this. What is this? And I'm like, well, this is this thing called accessibility. And that's when I kind of got an interest in it, right? And they were like, well, why don't you go ahead and write our documentation on accessibility? What guidance should we follow for accessibility? And that's where I kind of started diving really deep into it. And I had a background in working with different types of assistive technologies with my previous career. So I knew how important and how many gaps existed on the web for compatibility with assistive technologies and getting things to work properly, and like the impact that had on real people, right? Like families that I worked with for years, who's really struggled to communicate because of the gaps in technology. So I when I found this piece of I guess this space inside of the tech industry, it just felt like home for me. So that's where I started like just honing in on that skill. And then I kind of took that to every job that I got after. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started in tech.
Yeah, that's so good. There's so much in there that is so great. I think, one thing is that I think we work with a lot of boot camp students and people who are changing careers, and a lot of times they feel like that's a liability and not an asset. But I think what we see in your story is that you're able to, in a way, kind of blend your previous career with what you're doing in technology. And I think there's a ton of opportunity to do stuff like that. So very cool. And then also, just the kind of determination and willingness to learn, even through a job search, I think is huge. And treating it as a learning experience rather than, taking things personally, or, obviously a lot of people need to make money and have a job, but I like that approach of being able to just approach it as a learning experience. So that's great. Have you been able to, so you mentioned you've kind of taken this focus with you into other jobs. Is it something you've kind of done in addition to responsibilities? I know your current job is specific to accessibility, but up until then, was it something that you just kind of added on top of your other engineering responsibilities, or were you ever hired to do that specifically?
Yeah, so after I finished up at Red Hat, I went to Nutanix, where I started there as a software engineer. It was not part of my job description to focus on accessibility, but that's definitely something that I advocated for and brought to the team. So making sure as we were building our new applications, in fact, I think the first project I was given is to re-architect this project that had been built using Dust.js, which you couldn't even find the documentation for it. So when I started rebuilding it, I was really thinking about how accessible can we make this, and how can we add these features in there to make them accessible from the beginning, right? And then it was always I always saw it as, well, if we don't do it right the first time, it's only going to cause more bugs, more issues. So yeah, I felt like we were getting great buy-in from the team then. And then as I kind of started doing more talks in conferences and getting more involved in the community, I definitely started to see more people reaching out to me specifically to improve accessibility inside of their companies. So that's where I kind of started being able to specialize a little bit more. So then I moved to Pendo, where I was the accessibility subject matter expert there. We did some accessibility work there. But I was kind of really looking to have a role where I could focus on accessibility 100% of the time. And that's where, when I found CVS, that's kind of what they were offering. And honestly, they have an amazing accessibility team. I think we have over 150 people working on accessibility alone. So it's phenomenal place to be surrounded with people who are like-minded and experts in accessibility, which is really rare in tech companies. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tremendous. I had no idea the organization was that big. So that's great. It's really interesting to see that you've kind of pursued this passion and this specialization and how it's gone for you. I'm curious now that you're more focused on accessibility, what your day-to-day at work looks like.
Yeah, so right now I'm heading a team to create accessibility trainings for the organization. So a lot of it is really like collaborating with other teams in the org. As I said, we have a large accessibility team at CVS, so we all work on different parts of the business and like really focus on like design or engineering or solutions for the enterprise, right? So kind of bringing all those teams together to create great documentation for what we're doing. So like provide trainings for engineers, for designers, for product owners, right? For everybody in the company, which has been really fun. So a lot of creating best practices for accessibility.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. And on that note, I'm kind of curious. So accessibility, obviously hugely important. You've mentioned the impact you've seen it have on real people and their ability to use technology. I found in my experience that unless there's buy-in, like you mentioned, and kind of resources set aside, that accessibility ends up being kind of like a lot of places treat testing, where it's like, if we have time, it'll be nice to have, but not kind of an essential piece. So I'm curious, like, how you might advocate within an engineering organization for more resources devoted to accessibility.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I see it as a kind of cost up front, right? Because I know that when I was an engineer and I was developing projects or even working on a team on an app with a team, we often ended up having a lot more defects and issues on apps that we weren't thinking about creating accessible from the beginning, because we didn't when you're creating accessible applications, like, you're really testing a lot. You're really going through and making sure that things are working properly. You're testing across different browsers, across different assistive technologies. So in doing that, you actually discover a lot of things that you didn't catch or that you didn't really think through the experience. And then you end up creating a better product. You end up having a lot less issues in the long term, a lot less bugs in your code. And then, of course, you can set up a lot of automated tests to help you catch some easy accessibility misses, like your alt text, making sure that you have some the parsing is correct, right? That you're not duplicating IDs or anything like that. So I would definitely say that it helps your engineering team create better quality products if you're developing with accessibility in mind.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I hadn't thought about kind of the testing perspective and how it forces you to be more mindful of how things are actually flowing. But that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's super compelling. I'm curious, kind of on that note as well, sometimes it's hard to get engineering organizations to completely shift their approach or their culture. So in the case where maybe it's taking a little bit longer, is there some low-hanging fruit that you would recommend for people to start implementing that they could do without maybe making huge changes into the way they develop? Like, for example, like you mentioned alt tags, maybe ARIA, stuff like that. Like, what's kind of your top 5 or something like that for what you'd recommend?
Yeah, and I would say part of the biggest or the most amount of defects or issues that we see when it comes to accessibility on the web is the misuse of semantics, which is a pretty easy win, right? Like, when you're building your applications, make sure that you're using the right semantics. So if you are trying to create functionality of an action, like use a button, like a proper semantic button. It comes with pre-built keyboard functionality. So all across the board, assistive technologies are going to be able to recognize that as a button, understand that if you select certain keys on your keyboard, or assistive technology is going to activate that element, right? Same thing with links. Make sure that you're using semantic links and that you're setting up your page structure correctly, right? Follow the the heading structure of your page, if you're going to be using landmarks, really understand what they're used for. Those are things like the header, the footer of the page, the main landmark where all of your content is held. So like as long as you're kind of sectioning off your content like that, using the right HTML for the job that you're trying to achieve, then you should be good to go. Honestly, like I think taking those easy steps to remediate that inside your applications would be super beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, not a connection I had made before. We talk about semantic HTML and it's important, but I think maybe it's easy to forget that the browsers are kind of built to interpret the different tags, and it helps you a lot that way. So yeah, super, super interesting. I want to be thinking more about that now, I think, and not just making everything a div is, especially we React developers have a bad habit of doing, I think. So yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to shift focus a little bit and talk more about your speaking. So I've done a bit of speaking. I'm really big on it. I think there's tremendous upside for it, especially if you can kind of get over that stage fright. Like I'm nervous every time before I speak publicly, but I think there's just tremendous benefit for those that are willing to do it. And it seems like you've been really sought after and have had a lot of really interesting opportunities. So I'm curious if you can maybe tell us a little bit about how you went from being involved in meetups locally to speaking at these big global conferences.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about kind of going back to right before I left Red Hat. So my internship was about to end. I was looking for a full-time job as a front-end engineer, really. And because I had already been doing those smaller study sessions with developers, I think we were meeting twice a week, every week for 6 months by that point. My hiring manager at Nutanix actually was like, hey, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but you should reach out to me. I would love to sponsor your meetup group. I had no idea what that meant. I wasn't really planning on creating a meetup group, but I was like, heck yes, I'm going to take this money. I'm going to do something with it. So I think that moment I was like, well, if I have to put something together, I have to learn how to speak in front of people. I have to be kind of like pushing this out, right? So I think that's the first time that I ever spoke in front of people. And I'll say, like, before getting into tech, I was a pretty shy person. No way I was gonna go in front of somebody or introduce myself to a stranger. But I think, like, also through having a lot of health issues, I kind of felt like, well, I shouldn't be here anyway, so what's the harm? So it kind of changed my perspective too. But I feel like this is something that I wouldn't have done otherwise. But I think getting a chance to do this, I really see that there are so many benefits. I think like I wouldn't be where I'm at today in my career if it wasn't for my community involvement. But then kind of getting to speak, I think my first talk ever was setting up your first Vue.js project. And it was just like, hey, here's the terminal, here's how you set up your project, here are the things that you need to select depending on the type of project you want to make. And I learned so much. I had set up thousands of Vue projects by that point, right? I'm a big nerd, so when I study something, I really try to get as many things done as possible. But kind of putting content together for this talk showed me all the gaps of little things that I never even thought of or questioned, why is it like this? And trying to teach someone different concepts that you think you really discover all the gaps in the things that you didn't even know existed. So I think that really got me hooked in creating content for people. So when I started on creating content for accessibility, I think that was like the perfect marriage. I kind of diving deeper into like the problems that existed across browsers or across different assistive technologies or different implementation techniques, and how maybe they were better for this technology but not so great for this other one, right? So it was like an even bigger puzzle that I wanted to solve, and the fact that there weren't a lot of answers for this stuff in the accessibility space because it's still fairly new, it was great. It's a little challenging. It's a fun little exercise. But kind of going back to your point, I do believe that getting involved in your community and kind of getting over that stage fright, I would say, it does amazing things for your career. I will say that as I speak more and more in front of people, I realize that everybody is thinking kind of the same as I'm thinking, right? Like you think that everyone's going to call you out, or, oh, it's going to be so embarrassing if I say something wrong. But like, I've said a lot of things wrong in some of my talks, right? Where I'll say like, hey, this is, and somebody's like, actually, they came up with this new technology and now we don't even have to do that anymore. And it's like, great, fantastic. I'll put it in my next talk. So like, I get called out for things that I might have missed. So like, I also see that as a learning opportunity, right? So like, in my next talk, I'll do it better. And then somebody's going to catch something then, and then I'm going to do it better. And I'm going to learn too, right? So I think it's great learning opportunity for yourself. You're spreading what you're learning to your community, and they're going to help you learn throughout the way. Honestly, it's like a beautiful cycle.
Yeah, definitely a kind of virtuous circle, I think. And I found like in addition to, I don't know that I've maybe been called out a bit, but I find something else also kind of happens where I think people assume that if you are up talking, then you must be an authority, or people just kind of grant you authority, like mentally, just for having spoken in the first place, whether or not you know what you're talking about. Like a lot of times I feel like I don't really know what I'm talking about, or a lot of people know a lot more than I do, but there's kind of this weird like aura like that kind of happens when you're on stage. I don't know. Have you found the same thing?
I definitely feel like, and I think it's a matter of, we have an amazing community here, right? But every time I'm on stage, especially like I try to do my talks, I know I speak kind of like you mentioned globally, but I really like to do my talks in my local meetup groups first, get a lot of feedback. And it always feels very welcoming. It always feels like people are there not just to kind of watch you fail kind of thing. They're really there to support you, and they want to grow and learn with you. So I would say try to find that in your communities, right? Like very supportive communities that are going to help you grow in that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe I've been spoiled by the triangle, but yeah, I've always had really good experiences. So that's great. How did you go from kind of speaking locally to getting involved with these bigger conferences?
Yeah, so I think the first ever conference that I did outside of a meetup, I actually attended All Things Open here in North Carolina, which actually Todd was amazing, and he gave out a couple of scholarship tickets. So I was one of those scholarship tickets getting into tech. And I had just started my first job at Nutanix, updating that application, and I was like, well, I'm going to use Vue because I work with a lot of backend engineers. They need to understand this, easy documentation, etc. As I was there, I took up all of the Vue courses that existed in that conference, and I ended up meeting somebody from their community, and I just started talking to them, really geeking out about accessibility and what it means and how we could bring this into the framework. And then they were like, oh, you should really apply to the VueConf US conference, which is like the Vue conference inside the US. And I was like, no way, what am I going to say? This is my first job as an engineer. That was so embarrassing. But he's like, apply, let's try it. I ended up applying, I got in, and I was like, oh my gosh, like here's a big conference. I need to put the perfect content together. But that went really well. Again, I did the talk here locally. I got a lot of support locally. And then I went on to give that talk, and then that kind of spiraled from there. Then I got really involved in a lot of the Vue community. I actually write their accessibility documentation on their Vue 3 framework. And then, yeah, I just became kind of like a subject matter expert for Vue in accessibility, and it just kind of went from there. That's what I mean. Like one opportunity can really turn into multiple things that you never even expected, right? All this started because I did a course on Udacity, right? That I didn't want to do the online threads, and then it just kind of spiraled from there.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think I'm trying to parse out like what that is. I think it seems like you have a willingness to put yourself out there, I guess, at the end of the day. And it seems like that's opened up a lot of really interesting opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I would say don't be scared to do that.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what are the kind of actionable things to pull out, especially for our audience. I think a lot of our listeners are where you were at that point when you were just getting started. And yeah, I think kind of your mindset of like, well, like, what do I have to lose? I think is really great. And yeah, when you get exposure to kind of randomness in the world, I think it ends up kind of opening up doors, hopefully. And of course, like if not, then like no harm, no foul, I think. So that's great. I'm curious, like with the speaking, was that kind of what led into your involvement with the like Vue community and Vue team in general, or were those kind of separate but ended up overlapping in some way?
I guess they were happening simultaneously, right? As I was kind of speaking at conferences, I would meet people. Like, for example, I met the owners of the Vue School team, which they provide like online courses. So they're like, oh, you should do a course on accessibility. And I was like, heck yeah. So we kind of started working with them. Then as I started going to more and more conferences, meeting the creator of Vue, I would often sit with him like, hey, what can we do for accessibility? Like, we need to really, like, here are the gaps in the framework. Like, every time I build a project, I have to update this and this and this and this. Like, how do we automate that a little bit? So then he was very awesome in listening to my ideas, and he was like, okay, how about we start you off with like writing some documentation for this. So I really worked with the team, who are also kind of in that speaker area, so like you got to meet them over time. So at this point, I've been working with a lot of them for years, on different conferences and different projects like that. But yeah, they're very welcoming. It happened kind of organically and simultaneously because I'm very passionate about accessibility, and I will pull anyone aside to advocate for it.
Got it. That makes sense. Very cool. And what's kind of your current involvement? Do you have any like official positions nowadays, or are you kind of more focused on other things at this point?
I would say I was a lot more involved pre-pandemic. Since the pandemic hit, I've kind of slowly backed out from a lot of community stuff. It's not the same. But before, I mean, I'm still part of a community partner for Vue.js. I do a lot of conferences for them still. I did a couple of online virtual events throughout the pandemic, but I definitely stepped away a little bit. Like right before the pandemic, we had started kind of like a global community to connect all of the Vue.js communities from around the world. I think we had like 5,000 people show up for our first event. It was amazing. And then the pandemic hit, and I just needed to step away from community things for a little bit. But they're doing great work there. So if you're interested in learning Vue, it's an easy framework to learn. I would say pretty similar to React. And yeah,
Got it.
Fun people.
Yeah, that's very cool. I'm curious, that's kind of on that note. So I personally have not been to a meetup since the pandemic. Have you found that basically things have struggled to recover at this point in terms of in-person stuff?
I think people aren't 100% comfortable with going back to in-person events. I actually just last month did my first event ever since 2020, back in person, and we had probably about 15 people show up, which was, as much as I expected. But I think virtual events right now are still a thing, and they're gonna stick around for a little bit longer.
Got it. Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Got to get back eventually, though. I think I'd love to actually see people in person at some point, so we can cross our fingers.
Yeah.
Shifting gears again a little bit. So as you know, the show is called Develop Yourself, and kind of the idea is that it's not just about getting engineering skills, but kind of developing your skills and your network and your habits and your mindset and all this stuff. And I know for myself, when I reflect on my own journey, I end up kind of, extracting principles that I end up repeating a lot to people. So for example, one is just embrace your curiosity. And that comes from like my own experience in a boot camp where I didn't do that and I felt like it really hurt me. So I end up telling that to people a lot. Sounds like that's something you've done as well in terms of being curious and going where your interests are. But I'm curious, just like when you think about your own story, are there kind of ideas or strategies or just bits of advice that you can pull from your journey and things that you kind of suggest that other people might do?
Yeah, honestly, when I look back and kind of think about the things I've done and the decisions I made, I'm like, I can't believe that was me making those decisions, right? Like I was kind of going back, I was very different before having my health issues and kind of having to switch fields. But I would say one of the things that I've kind of looking back, I've recognized and really have embraced is kind of getting comfortable with the idea of being really uncomfortable. Kind of putting yourself in situations that you wouldn't think are not necessarily not right for you, but something that you've never even considered as being an interest to you, right? explore it, explore like technology is so big, like this industry is so big, right? So I would say have fun with it. Try not to turn down any opportunities if you can. Try to explore as much as you can. Be very diligent about keeping up with whatever you're trying to achieve, I would say, because different goals have different ways to get there, right? But I would say be true to yourself, and say yes a lot. Even if it's uncomfortable, say yes and put yourself out there.
Yeah, that's great. I think, yeah, being getting comfortable being uncomfortable is huge. I think I can maybe be a little bit scary on this front sometimes, but when people ask me like, oh, what's it like being a software engineer, or should I learn to code? Sometimes I'll be like, yeah, like what's your pain tolerance, kind of deal, just because it's a painful process, and I think that kind of goes back to the same idea of like just embracing being uncomfortable and also seeing what can lie on the other side of that and how much opportunity there is for folks that are willing to be a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, and also kind of going on the mental health of this, right? I also recognize that imposter syndrome is a big thing in our fields, right? So I would say remind yourself that you're not alone. Like everybody had this learning curve getting into the field, like everybody. I would say don't feel scared to go talk to your fellow developers and ask them about their experience. I'm sure that they're going to shock you with how similar their experiences are. Yeah, I would say that I think coming into the tech field, I also had like a misconception of like, oh, developers aren't social beings. Nobody wants to talk, nobody wants to open up, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. So I would say don't be afraid to be vulnerable around your peers.
Yeah, that's great. I think something I try to remind myself on that front is like, no one was born knowing anything, right? Especially not software engineering. So everyone starts from the same place, which is zero, and you go from there. And I think people are just on different stages of that journey. But yeah, I think it's helpful for me to remind myself, like not even Mark Zuckerberg, he was not born knowing how to code. It's a skill that you acquire over time. And yeah, totally second the social nature. I think maybe we haven't been well served by the overarching stereotype, but I'm glad that it's not true. We actually do like talking to each other. So it's good at the end of the day. Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, Maria, thanks so much again for being on the show. Is there, I know we were just discussing your wisdom, but is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with before we go on our way?
Yeah, sure. A little tidbit. Keyboard test your applications, everyone. Please make sure everything works on
and
keyboard.
Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, great point. So I would say,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say like what's that process look like?
Yeah, so I would say when you're building your applications, put away your mouse, literally turn it off, and try to do everything that your application can do with your keyboard alone. So using your tab key, make sure that everything that is actionable in your page is accessible by keyboard, meaning that you get that little ring of focus in that element as you're tabbing through the page. You should always see that. You should never lose that little ring. You can change the color of it, make sure that you're meeting color contrast. But as you're doing that, make sure that all your buttons, which perform actions inside that page, are activated by space and enter, and any links, which again are only used to kind of send the user to a new destination, those should also be highlighted and keyboard accessible. Yep.
Great. Yep. More actionable steps for us to start thinking about as we're building applications. So that's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Maria, is there any place that people could find you? Any place you'd like to direct people who might want to learn more about what you're doing and accessibility in general?
Oh, sure. You could find me on LinkedIn. My name is Maria Lamardo, and I have a Twitter account at Maria Lamardo.
Perfect. And we'll include everything in the show notes so you can find Maria online. And yeah, that's great. Maria, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Peter. It was great seeing you again.
That's all for today. Thanks so much for listening. Some shameless plugs. Parsity is at parsity.io. That's parsity.io. And my YouTube channel is at youtube.com/Peter Elbaum. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one.